Good Wednesday afternoon, and welcome to this edition of Border Report Live, coming to you live from Harlingen, Texas, in the Rio Grande Valley of South Texas. My name's Rudy Mireles, and I am your host for this program. And joining me today is South Texas correspondent Sandra Sanchez. Hey, Sandra.
Hi, Rudy. How are you?
Good. We got lots to talk about today. What's on tap?
Well, you know what? There's so much news happening with immigration. We just thought we'd throw it all together and catch everyone up on the latest that has been happening as the Trump administration changes policies and makes detentions and deportations a priority.
All right. Well, we'll check in with you in just a moment, and we're going to go through some of the headlines making news across the border, starting on the other side of the border from us in Los Angeles. The National Guard will be leaving Los Angeles. The Trump administration is ending the Trump administration is ending the deployment of those 2,000 National Guard troops in Los Angeles, and roughly 4,000 troops and 700 Marines had been deployed to Southern California as part of the Trump administration's ICE raids. Now, it's unclear still just how long the rest of the guardsmen that are there are going to stay in the region. Those troops were tasked with protecting federal buildings and guarding immigration agents as they carried out a series of arrests of undocumented migrants throughout the city. In other immigration news, deportations are now happening into African countries. The U.S. Sent 5 men that they describe as barbaric criminals to the small African nation of Eswatini in an expansion of the Trump administration's largely secretive third country deportation program. Now, this is video taken in February from Fort Bliss, where similar deportations took place. And on a late night post on X, that's the social media platform formerly known as Twitter, Homeland Security said the men sent to Eswatini are citizens of Vietnam, Jamaica, Cuba, Yemen, and Laos. Eswatini is a small landlocked monarchy on the southeastern edge of the African continent, just east of Johannesburg. Now, the men there are accused of terrorizing American communities, but are now off of American soil. In other news, and this is something Sandra and I have talked about in the past, is immigration judges, several immigration judges, 17 immigration court judges have been fired in recent days. That brings the total of judges that have either been terminated, transferred, or accepted retirement officers since the start of this year to 103. And that's kind of an issue, as we talked about that huge backlog of immigration cases and the already lacking immigration judges to handle these cases, so that should make things a little more difficult. And according to the union that represents those judges, there are about 600 immigration judges now nationwide. The new budget bill, however, allows for up to 800 immigration judges, but since 2015, as we told you and as we've reported to you, several administrations have struggled to now fill those positions. And happening in other news across the border, I'm going to bring Sandra back in. Tell us a little bit about some of these water rescues that we're seeing. We've been talking about them in Central Texas last week. We saw them out in, I believe it was Julian's area of responsibility out in
near Ruidoso, New Mexico.
Yeah, New Mexico.
I know that area well.
And now we've got some down here on the border. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, we've been watching floodwaters. There was a flood warning for the Laredo area, but actually yesterday in Quemada is about 25 miles north of Eagle Pass. Eagle Pass is right across from Piedras Negras. You can see Border Patrol agents from the Del Rio sector actually helped residents there because the waters just rose. Now there is a watch on the Laredo area because that's really a pass through. All the water's going to fall in Eagle Pass and it's going to come down the Rio Grande, and at that curve there in Laredo, it could flood some of the international bridges. Although I just was in communication with a Customs and Border Protection spokesman within the past 2 hours, and he said the flood warning's actually been lifted, but there is concern still that water could rise at the Juarez Lincoln International Bridge and the Columbia Solidarity International Bridge that connects Laredo to Nuevo Laredo. And so they're watching that carefully, but it looks like the heaviest rains hit there in the Quemado area.
Yeah, and that's something that, we've been talking about. We talked about it with Sandy Overly, our guest earlier this week, about some of the rescue operations that these Border Patrol agents are having to get into, and we just saw some more there in those images that we were able to get today. But it just goes to show how important that BORSTAR training is for folks, and it really doesn't matter. Whoever needs help, if they can help, they're going to help, it seems.
That was a great conversation, talking to the woman locally who helps to train the Border Patrol agents who want to be certified as BORSTAR or BORTAC. She helps to train them in the swim section. As you can see, all that high water, it's necessary. We have these people who know how to do water rescues.
Definitely. And if you would like to watch that episode of Border Report live, you can go to borderreport.com and find that. Just go over to Border Report Live on that website. And other news making waves across the country is a new farm worker visa program that's being dubbed the Bracero Program 2.0. One of our local representatives up on Capitol Hill, Congresswoman Monica de la Cruz, introduced this bill. Give us a little background on what this bill is exactly.
Yeah, it's basically a reiteration of the Bracero program that started back in the 40s. We saw 4 million farm workers come from Mexico legally to work in the fields. This was because of the shortage due to the war at the time. And she wants to kind of revive the spirit of that initial program. As the Trump administration has these ICE raids and prioritizing people who are here illegally, ridding them from the country, we are seeing a decrease in the number of people who are showing up to pick the fields and clear the crops. And this is worrisome. She sits on the House Agriculture Committee. She has the ear of Agriculture Secretary Brooke Rollins, who has actually been to this region several times with her recently. So this new plan, a couple of the highlights, what she's been saying is we need a way to streamline the process for what's called the H-2A Farm Worker Visa Program. In order to get a visa, the worker has to apply to the consulate or to the State Department. The employer has to apply to the Labor Department. They can't transfer it if they change jobs. It's very cumbersome, and then they have to leave after a certain period. So what she wants to do is start this program where the application process is in one single centralized electronic portal. And so everybody goes there, all the information is entered in one place. It would also include greenhouses and indoor farms, so more modernization of this. And everyone would be paid, the wages would be set to the state's minimum wage plus $2 an hour. So she's saying farm workers would be fairly compensated and employers would know what they had to pay. In the past, there were some allegations that farm workers, weren't paid what they were due.
Yeah, and that's definitely one of the arguments that, I've heard from, conservative groups, is that if you cared so much about these people, you wouldn't be letting them get, taken advantage of in the fields and in the farms.
No, absolutely. That was the big problem. There was also allegations of corruption happening in Mexico when the farm workers signed up there and they had to pay a fee that they were due money when they retired, and this never came to them. So, she says they also want to extend the contracts to a year, from 10 months to a year, and that way it covers all the crops, because she was telling KVEO in an interview yesterday from the Capitol that, the crops have different growing seasons, and we need more people all the time rotating to make sure that they're always there. This regional pilot program would allow them to change their jobs, something we just talked about they can't do, and they wouldn't have to reapply for the visa. Now, if they were without a job for a certain period of time, then they would have to self-deport and reapply and come back. But, a lot more provisions in this to encourage farm workers to come from Mexico, and also some accountability safeguards. The General Accounting Office is going to be doing a program, watching it. They have to put out reports. So, she says some of this came actually from a roundtable working group that was here in South Texas that came up with some of these ideas.
Interesting. I think we have a soundbite from her. Let's go ahead and play that now.
Look, what I'm seeing is that we have an opportunity to look at our immigration process and bring hardworking legal immigrants into the United States to help our South Texas farmers. It's been done in the past in the Bracero program. It was very successful. It was a respected program. And what I'm doing is reviving the spirit of the Bracero program with modernization and making it efficient and streamlining the process so that it makes it easier for our farmers and ranchers to get the workforce that they need.
One of the things that you had mentioned about the old program was the need to reapply. With this new modernization that the Congresswoman is talking about, would that kind of help that problem? Would they be able to work multiple jobs?
Yeah, actually, and what's really interesting is that they could change jobs within the same state without having to apply for the visa again. They could, if their job ends, they have 6 months to find another one within the same state. So let's say Texas or California, and they would be called portable H-2A workers. Otherwise, after 60 days, they have to leave the United States. Now, they also want to put a cap of 10,000 portable H-2A workers at any given time so that they don't have too many. And that number actually can be limited if they see a need in the future.
Do we know if this includes family members or is it just the worker themselves?
You know what? That's a good question. Right now, they're just talking about the worker. There is another visa that, as we talked about recently, that applies to the family member. And so they never mentioned getting rid of that additional visa. Again, I don't know if that will be part of the portal, though, that, to make this whole streamlined process. That may be something that we hear about in the future.
Do you know how many farms have been impacted by ICE raids since all this started happening? Yeah,
it's really hard to quantify, but in California in June, farmers reported that between 30 and 60% of their farm workers have stopped showing up to work because of fears of raids by Immigration Customs Enforcement agents. Hidalgo County, which is just the county to the west of us, report 80% of workers are undocumented, and that's according to the National Center of Farm Worker Health. So, this is a way to legally have people sign up, be here, legal visas, working, helping get food on your table, my table, and, filling those jobs that are needed in the ag industry.
I know it's something we definitely haven't mentioned. We've talked about the ICE raids on farms in California. We really haven't talked about them down here because the ICE raids have been so focused on so many different types of small businesses, and that's been kind of the focus. So it's interesting, that 80% of workers are undocumented. So, that's a big deal, especially, in our region down here in South Texas. A lot of that food that's, grown and made here and raised here, it kind of stays here in South Texas as well. So should be interesting to see how this develops and going forward. But anyway, we're going to take a quick break, so stay with us. Border Report is back in less than 1 minute. Welcome back to this Wednesday edition of Border Report Live. My name is Rudy Mireles, and I am the host of this program. Joining me right there to my left is Sandra Sanchez, our South Texas correspondent. Sandra, earlier this week, one of the headlines that we talked about were all those changes to the different immigration fees. Lots of fees increasing, lots of fees being added to things that didn't have fees before, but there's also several cuts happening to some of the programs for migrants and asylum seekers. Tell us a little bit about those.
Yeah, that's right. As the Trump administration recently got the budget bill passed that they wanted, that adds the most money ever for ICE in the history of the agency, will add more CBP officers and technology. They're admitting that they want to offset costs, and President Trump signed something that's calling for almost $9.4 billion in rescissions. So those are programs, 22 programs, including asylum and migrant programs that had been funded by Congress that he's now saying we're going to cut. This comes after the OMB director, Russell Vought, in late May sent the White House a memo detailing these programs should be considered for the chopping block. Some that really raised some concern had to do with decreasing funding for HIV programs that help other countries to treat the illness. But one of them that's particularly concerning, that concerns the subject we talk about, is $800 million cut from the Department of State for migration and refugee assistance. So this agency has a total budget annually of $3.2 billion, and it funds a refugee and admissions program. So they would cut it by $800 million. Basically, they're going to maintain the funding and the staff to oversee humanitarian assistance, but they're saying, and they think donors can pick up any funding for life-saving programs. And they said donors can pick up funding for humanitarian admissions. They're only going to maintain funding for life-saving programs and for repatriations. So they're really saying, we don't need this program at all. Today, The Hill, which is a sister of Nexstar, reports that there are enough votes to get this passed to the Senate, and they are considering one provision that would keep $500 million, $500 million for a one global health program that's still that's causing some discussion up in Washington right now. But as far as the refugee assistance admissions program, it looks like it will be cut.
What kind of programs, do we see down here on the ground that might be impacted by this?
Well, what I was thinking was the State Department was operating these third-person programs for people to apply for asylum, like in Costa Rica and other countries, and I'm wondering if that's not going to be cut.
Interesting. And as far as are there any other kinds of cuts happening that are related to this?
They're saying that funding for undocumented migrants really needs to be looked at and scrutinized right now.
All right. And what are migrant groups saying about this program?
Excuse me, I had a tickle in my throat. Well, they're opposing it. They're saying that this could cut necessary and vital foreign assistance to global health and refugee programs.
All right. Well, stick around, Sandra. We're going to come back to you after the break. And when we come back, we're going to talk about another issue DHS has been talking about, and that's the assaults on ICE agents. And we'll also take a look at some of the CBP numbers from last month. Stay with us. Border Report is back in 1 minute. And welcome back to this Wednesday edition of Border Report Live. I am your host, Rudy Midelis, down here in Harlingen, Texas, in the Rio Grande Valley. And joining me is our South Texas correspondent, Sandra Sanchez. And Sandra, before the break, we were kind of talking about, just kind of wrap up what we were discussing. What are migrant groups saying about the cuts to those programs for refugees?
Yeah, they're urging the Trump administration not to do it. They're saying it's going to be really harmful to these foreign assistance programs, these global health agencies that rely on this funding from the United States, that, we need to be a leader in the world. We need to help these vulnerable populations. They're saying there's one group called the World Relief, which is a Christian group, and they said, quote, "It's essential to protecting the dignity of vulnerable people around the world." So, that's kind of the sentiment that most are expressing, holding their breath, hoping it doesn't happen. But it looks like they have enough votes in the Senate. As you know, they do have enough votes in the House, and President Trump has already issued a memo saying he wants this.
All right. And one of the things that you said the money saved from these cuts could go to is beefing up ICE, beefing up the Department of Homeland Security, anything that has to do with immigration. And but it begs the question, kind of sliding into our next topic, how difficult is it going to be to recruit ICE agents? Because DHS has said, I think it was yesterday, that assaults on ICE agents are actually up by more than 800%.
Yeah, they're saying they're up by 830%, but let me just go back. So if they cut this money, it doesn't necessarily mean it's going to go to ICE because, they've passed the budget bill. Things are supposed to be set in certain pockets the way they appropriate it. But you're right. I think the point is to make sure that the American taxpayer doesn't fund this. They're trying to say we have a $3 trillion deficit and we need to cut some of these costs. So, yeah, now skipping forward to what you said, I've asked the Department of Homeland Security to quantify for me exactly how much they mean when they say assaults are up 830% from January 21st when the president took office until July 14th compared to that same time frame in 2024. They've sent pictures showing ICE agents who have been hurt. Of course, this all includes time period in Los Angeles when we had the riots and the disturbances recently. So, I've asked them for that information. I think it's really important. They are saying that the ICE agents are under attack. But, as soon as we get that data, and if somebody from DHS is listening, really, really, we're interested in knowing and breaking it down for the public.
Yeah, it's definitely something that would be good to have, especially because we're seeing, folks on the Democratic side of the aisle in Congress putting in these bills for ICE agents to, not be masked, to have clearly visible badges. So it seems like this is that data would definitely help with, supporting that cause of, raising awareness about the assaults on ICE agents.
Yeah. Absolutely.
And speaking of, those assaults and crossing the border, we do have some of the numbers from June from CBP. Tell us a little bit about those.
Well, they say it was historically the lowest numbers that CBP has ever released, in history. They're saying there were nationwide 25,228 total encounters, but on the southwest border, which is the area we usually cover, 6,072 apprehensions. That is a 15% drop from the previous record in March. We've been talking about the 8,000 figure in March, which was down from 128,000 in March 2024. Now we have barely a 6,000 figure, so that is very, very low. And they're touting this one particular date, June 28th. There was only 136 apprehensions on the 2,000-mile-long border from Brownsville to San Diego. So that's a lot of land and a lot of agents and very few people that crossed.
Yeah, it's definitely interesting because 136 apprehensions. I think when all the the migrants were coming over in Brownsville back before the end of I think it was Title 42.
Title 42, right? May 2020.
Yeah, they were. I think the limit just in the city of Brownsville, because the city of Brownsville, along with some NGOs, were assisting these folks. I think the number was 200 a day minimum. That's all they could have, max. That's all they could help.
Oh, no, there were thousands crossing a day. Yes.
But I'm saying, 200 was too much for them to handle at that time, and now the number's down to 136. But you're right, thousands were crossing every single day in that area. Just kind of shows how easy it is to get overwhelmed too, so 136, that's a massive drop.
And all placed everything that you mentioned at the beginning of the show, the new asylum fees that the Trump administration, the new policies, the extensions for detentions, sending migrants to this African country that very few of us have heard of. It's an all-encompassing immigration policy. The idea is to discourage people from coming illegally.
Mm-hmm. And there's another thing that I wanted to talk about was how, if going back to that story about the deportations to Africa, let's say someone's picked up by ICE, how do you find that person?
Yeah. You know what? That's actually a really good question, and it's hard. One thing that you have to have is called an AA number, which is it's a unique identification code that every immigrant is given from the Department of Homeland Security. Adults. We're not talking about children. This is just adults. There's something called the ICE Online Detainee Locator System, and we're going to have that on borderreport.com for you to find. You need to know the person's full name, their date of birth, the country of origin, and this AA number. The AA number over the years has been so important, and it's a 9-digit number. It's hard. In order for me to go to immigration court, I have to look through dockets which just have AA numbers. And then I've been asked by federal judges sometimes while sitting in court, who are you here for? And I'll have to say the person and the AA number. They're not identified by a name. It is an AA number. And so now if you're looking for an undocumented a child,
I was going to ask because you said it's a different process, right?
Now they go under the Department of Homeland Health and Human Services, and that is under the it's an entirely different agency. The public can call, I was looking for this number, 1-800-203-7001, or they can email the Office of Refugee Resettlement. And but information, I can tell you as a journalist, I cannot ask for any information for a minor. That information is all protected under HHS, a completely different agency from DHS, and they're very protective of the migrants and the children and the people that they give that information to. But legal authorities can usually, and nonprofits that help with children can usually help. if you're trying to find someone.
And just real quick, one last question because we have less than a minute left. But that requirement is by law, right? With for children to be going under the HHS process.
Yeah, it's under the Flores settlement. After 72 hours, a child in detention is supposed to be sent to HHS and kept comfortable, given proper nutrition, education, a setting around other children. And the idea is, it's for their health and safety. And so the Department of Health and Human Services separates them and makes sure that they're taken care of with foster organizations that have been vetted. We as reporters cannot talk to children in that kind of setting, but there is that number, again, 1-800-203-7001, or look up the Office of Refugee Resettlement, and you can probably ask for someone to help you get that information.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Sandra, for your reporting today. And thank you at home for watching. You've been watching Border Report Live. We'll see you tomorrow.